Hey there! Welcome to the CMMC Compliance Guide Podcast. I'm Stacey.
And I'm Brooke.
From Justice IT Consulting, where we help businesses like yours navigate CMMC and NIST 800-171 compliance. We're hired guns, getting companies fast-tracked to compliance, but today we're here to give you all the secrets for free, so if you want to tackle it yourself, you're equipped to do so. Let's dive into today's episode and keep your business on track. Today's episode is all about Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI. We're going to talk about what it really is, why it matters, and the most common mistakes contractors make when handling it. If you've ever worried about accidentally mishandling sensitive data, this one's for you. All right, Brooke, let's start simple.
Alrighty, let's do.
What exactly is CUI and why does it matter so much in defense contracting?
Well, CUI is unclassified but controlled information that the government possesses or creates that requires safeguarding or dissemination controls to those with a lawful government purpose for handling that CUI. That's what CUI actually is. I think probably the lion's share of CUI is going to be controlled technical data, so it's going to be drawings, it's going to be specifications, it's going to be anything related to all that, but it could also be, depending on what you do with the Department of Defense, it could be personally identifiable information, PII, or it could be a lot of electronic health, personal health information, EPHI. It could be any of those things. So there's a whole giant long list of CUI classifications, but really, for the DoD, the lion's share of that is going to be controlled technical information, which is, like I said, going to be drawings, specifications, things like that result from manufacturing things.
So, Brooke, what are the biggest mistakes you see companies make when handling CUI?
The biggest mistakes, probably the biggest mistake is sending CUI unencrypted through email. They get it unencrypted, they know it's CUI or think it's CUI. Or maybe if it's even marked, but if they get it through email, they just go ahead and send it through email. So mishandling that CUI through email is probably the biggest thing that we see. So really, you have a duty to say, if you get something that looks like CUI, and you have a duty to say, hey, Mr. Contracting Officer or Mrs. Contracting Officer, this document you sent or this email you sent sure looks like CUI. Is this in fact CUI or is it not? So they should be able to answer and say, no, it's not, or yes, it is. And from there, you can say, well, it's not marked. Can you mark it properly? And so they should mark it and send it back. Probably the next biggest thing would be just storing all your CUI with everything else, right? On your network, in your environment, if you have an enclave, if you have a CUI enclave, you probably are aware and splitting it out. But CUI access needs to be limited to those who should have access to that CUI. In other words, HR shouldn't have it, probably. I don't see why they would, but depending on, if your HR person is also a machinist, then maybe so. But if your HR does other things, maybe they do. But depends on how big your organization is, or rather how small it is. Accounting probably shouldn't have it. If there's somebody that only works on commercial projects and has nothing to do with the Department of Defense projects, they should be scoped out. They should not have access to that. So having access to CUI on personal devices, so you have a phone, you have email on it, and maybe you have access to OneDrive or SharePoint, and lo and behold, you can get to all that CUI on your mobile device, and nobody ever thinks about the phones, the cell phones. So they just don't even think those. They don't scope those in, and lo and behold, a lot of those have access to that CUI. And so if they have access, if you're not going to scope out those phones, then they have to be controlled. They have to meet all the applicable 110 controls and 320 assessment objectives. So that's another really big one. Making sure that flow down occurs. So not only in your organization, but if you subcontract out something, most people subcontract out something. They don't do everything. Just like Lockheed and Raytheon and all them subcontract, you'll probably subcontract out some pieces too. And anything that is CUI that is subcontracted out, they have to be the same level as you're supposed to be. So, and the flow down rule says that you're supposed to make sure that they're the same level as you. That doesn't mean you have to go assess their environment. But if you're supposed to meet DFARS 252, 204, 7012, then they do too. If they have to be level 2 certified, or if you have to be level 2 certified, so do they. So there are some caveats to that. If you are 100% sure that what you are sending them is just off-the-shelf stuff and has nothing to do with any CUI, and they don't get any information that could be even misconstrued as CUI, then that may be an off-the-shelf item, and they may not have to be. But you're going to have to make sure that that's documented, and if it's part of that project, you're going to have to make sure that you know and document that. So those are the biggest things that we see with mishandling CUI.
Now that we've covered those big mistakes, what happens if a contractor mishandled CUI?
Well, there's about a million things that can happen, but one of the things that can happen is if you send it through email and somebody's email is compromised, then that becomes a really big deal. There'll be a cyber incident opened up, it'll be investigated, the whole 9 yards. So if it's investigated and if the government figures out that you did something wrong, then you very well may be fined. I mean, there's fines out there in the millions of dollars right now to people that have to companies that have mishandled this. You could lose your contract. You could lose then the way you'd lose your contract is that you may no longer meet all the 110 controls that you said you met, and if that's not the case, then this contract requires that, then you may lose that contract, or you may not be able to get any new contracts, whatever the case may be. If it's something that they determine that you said you were doing and they determine that you're just plain not doing it, then that is a False Claims Act. And a False Claims Act, again, there's plenty of examples out there of False Claims Act, and there's plenty of those that are in the millions of dollars of fines right now as well. So there could be, depending on what it is, there could be jail time too. Don't know. That'd probably have to be pretty serious, I would hope. But they haven't ruled that out, so there could be jail time as well. If you're trying to get assessed and the assessor discovers through their examine, interview, and test not quite covering something like you said you would be, like you said you are, or maybe you just didn't say you are and you should be, it could cause you to fail an assessment as well. And that's a big deal also because of all the previous things, loss of contract, loss of future contracts, etc.
When a contractor goes through a CMMC Level 2 assessment, how do assessors check CUI handling?
The basic method is they'll examine, interview, and or test. They don't necessarily have to do all three of these things for each control or each assessment objective, but they have all three of those available to them. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to do all three or one of them or something like that, but they do have those three options. So they'll examine your policies, your plans, and your procedures. They'll examine your proof, any list or anything that you have. They'll examine all that. Test. MFA is required to access for instance, MFA is required to access your CUI. Then they'll say, hey, log on and let me see that you, in fact, do have MFA turned on. You'll log in, you'll do your MFA, and they'll go, great, thank you very much. Interview. They'll interview you. They'll interview your staff. There won't be any surprises here. They'll work all this out with you ahead of time. You'll say, here's my scope. Here's my initial set of documentation for you and the people that are in scope. And they'll say, all right, well, we want to talk to A, B, C, D, and E, right? And so you'll know that. You'll approve that. Or you can say, hey, little Johnny's going to be out on vacation for the next 2 months or whatever it might be. And so they'll choose somebody else. So, but you'll work all that out ahead of time. There's shouldn't be any surprises about any of that. But that's how they determine whether how you're handling CUI and whether you're mishandling it or not.
Let's talk solutions. What are some of the low-cost, practical best practices small contractors can use to handle CUI the right way?
Sure. So probably one of the best things you can do, if you can do it, not everybody can, but is to create a CUI enclave. And we've talked about that ad nauseum. And if you look for how to implement CMMC somewhere, there will be something about a CUI enclave. So sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. Some sort of CUI enclave makes sense, whether it's really small or incorporates everybody. If it incorporates everybody, that's more likely to be a small company where people wear a lot of hats. If you're in a larger company, it's a lot easier to separate out those jobs that are in it. Well, it's more easy to separate those jobs out that are CUI versus the ones that are not. So it's easier to do that, but it also depends on how much of your business is DoD work and includes CUI. So creating an enclave is probably the easiest single thing to do to minimize cost. Kind of on the enclave soapbox, there's a million different ways to do that if you can, but there are some better ways to implement that are a little lower cost than others. I'll go ahead and say it. Prevail is one of those. It may or may not fit you. You need to make sure you look into it and understand it and see if it'll work for you or not. But that's a lower cost solution that may work for you for CUI enclave. Limiting access, whether it's through a enclave tool like that or just a server on site, then make sure you limit access appropriately and again, limit that to only the people that need access. If you do have a server on site, good idea is to separate out the data, commercial data from the DoD data, put them on two different virtual servers. That'd be a really easy thing to do. Sometimes you'll run across some controls that you don't really want to implement for your commercial data and that you need to for your CUI data. And if you split it out, virtual server as virtual machine is an easy thing to create, an easy thing to spool up. I'd say you can do that also in the cloud as well, but we're talking about lower cost solutions. And the cloud, although it's ongoing, the cost is easier to handle than a new server or something. Cloud is not cheaper, so it'll be more expensive in the end. And then when you document everything, work very hard to make sure that you keep everything very, very organized. And it may seem counterintuitive, but really a GRC tool helps you do that. That is another expense, so you have to consider that. But consider the fact of what happens with your documents. Over time, you always have document sprawl, and your folders get put in different places. Your versions of documents grow, and it gets hard to handle. And this, when you do all your documentation properly with CMMC, it's not going to just be 15 documents. It's more likely going to be 40 or 50 or more documents. So especially when you start adding in all your proof and everything else, it's going to be a lot more than that. So all that leads to document sprawl. Easy way to handle that is in a GRC tool, and personally, I think in the end, it'll end up saving you some money, or at the very least some headache and some time, which time is money. So to figure that out, what do you charge other people for your time, and figure out if it's worth it or not. So I happen to think it's worth it. Other people may not, but that's my 2 cents right there.
Are there any recent updates or enforcement actions contractors should have on their radar?
There is. So we talked about it in the last podcast, and I think that one is up and ready to share. So yeah, okay, Stacey agrees. Stacey's the one that put it up, so she knows. So the 48 CFR has been published, and so it's live. The clock is ticking. It goes into effect on November 10th. The 48 CFR, again, is the one that puts CMMC in effect on contracts. So there are 4 phases to that. The first year, starting on November 10th of 2025, is basically what you're doing right now. You have to self-attest that you're doing what you say you're doing. POAMs are limited to 180 days, all sorts of fun stuff. But you have a year to do that until November 11th, 2026, November 10th, 2026. And when that will be, the Level 2 certifications will start being required on contracts. Again, there's some caveats to that. There may be some requirements by prime contractors or something for you to get yours earlier. The government did leave a little wiggle room for themselves. They could require a little earlier on a contract or two here or there, or later. So, but that's the basics of that 48 CFR. So that 48 CFR is a big one. So the FAR CUI rule, I believe, is in the proposed stage still, if I recall properly. But it's basically, they've always said they wanted to take this whole CMMC idea and get the DOD going on it and use the DOD as guinea pigs, I guess, and then roll it out to the rest of the federal government. Who knows exactly how to look, but they want to control that CUI, right? And so they're rolling out the CUI rule to the rest of the government, and that kind of kicks off the process of some CMMC-like rule for the rest of the federal government, and that's big, and it'll be a big change. So we'll see how well that goes, but that's the big thing coming.
If you have any questions about what we covered, reach out to us. We're here to fast-track your compliance journey. Text, email, or call in your questions, and we'll answer them for free here on the podcast. You can find our contact information at CMMCComplianceGuide.com. Stay tuned for our next episode. Until then, stay compliant, stay secure, and make sure to subscribe.